It is the spring of 1944. Deep beneath the French countryside, inside a labyrinth of reinforced concrete and stolen steel, men are working in silence. Not soldiers, scientists. Their hands are trembling, not from fear but from exhaustion. They haven't slept in 3 days, because what they are building, if it works, will make the Allied invasion impossible. It will make D-Day a massacre. It will change the outcome of the Second World War. And on the morning of June 6, 1944, it will be just weeks away from completion. This is the story of the weapon the history books almost forgot, the one that nearly worked. By 1943, Nazi Germany was bleeding. The Eastern Front had consumed entire armies. Hamburg had been reduced to ash by Allied bombers. Rommel's Afrika Korps had surrendered in Tunisia. Adolf Hitler, once the most feared man on the planet, was beginning to look like something else entirely. Desperate, and desperate men make dangerous decisions. Hermann Göring stood before Hitler in the Wolf's Lair that autumn and delivered news that turned the room to ice. The Luftwaffe could no longer guarantee air superiority over Western Europe. The skies that Germany had once owned belonged to someone else now. British Spitfires, American P-51 Mustangs. They were everywhere, and everyone in that room understood what that meant. When the Allies came, and they were coming, Germany would be fighting blind. But Hitler had not built the Third Reich by accepting limitations. He turned to his weapons developers with a single command. Give me something that cannot be stopped from the air. Something invisible. Something already in the ground. The answer came from a man named Hans Kammler. Kammler was not a household name, but he should be, an SS Gruppenführer with a civil engineering background. He had overseen the construction of Auschwitz. He had managed slave labor on an industrial scale. He understood how to build massive things quickly, quietly, and with absolute secrecy. When Hitler needed someone to manage Germany's most ambitious secret construction projects, Kammler was the obvious choice. Cold, efficient, utterly without conscience. He was the perfect man for an impossible job. The project was called Organization Todt, named after Fritz Todt, the engineer who had built the Autobahn and the Atlantic Wall before dying in a mysterious plane crash in 1942. Under Kammler's command, this organization would now focus its entire industrial muscle on a single objective: building a weapon delivery system so revolutionary, so deeply buried, that no Allied bomb could touch it. They called it the Hochdruck-Pump, the high-pressure pump, but history would come to know it by another name, the V-3. Let that sink in for a moment. Most people know about the V-1, the buzzing flying bomb that terrorized London. Most people know about the V-2, the ballistic missile that arrived faster than sound. But the V-3 was something else entirely. Something that makes the other two look like fireworks. The concept was not new. Engineers had theorized about it since the First World War. A supergun, not just a large cannon. Every army had those, but a cannon of almost incomprehensible length. A barrel so long that it could use a series of sequential propellant charges to accelerate a shell far beyond anything conventional artillery could achieve. Each charge would fire at precisely the right moment as the projectile passed it, pushing it faster and faster, stage after stage, until it reached a velocity that could hurl a shell over 200 kilometers. From France, straight into the heart of London. The chosen site was a chalk hillside near Mimoyecques, in the Pas-de-Calais region of northern France. It was perfect. The chalk could be tunneled easily. The hillside naturally pointed toward England, and the location was close enough to the English coast that even if the gun underperformed, it would still reach its target. Workers, most of them slave laborers, prisoners dragged from across occupied Europe, began drilling in November 1943. They worked in shifts around the clock. They carved enormous angled shafts deep into the earth, each one precisely angled at the correct elevation to strike London. Not one barrel, 5 clusters of 5 barrels each. 25 guns in total, buried inside a French hillside, invisible from the air, impervious to bombing. The plan was to fire 10 shells per barrel per hour. That is 250 shells raining down on London every single hour. every hour, around the clock, with no warning, no sound until impact. The city would have been uninhabitable within days. And here is where the story twists into something almost unbelievable. Allied intelligence knew something was happening at Mimoyecques. Aerial reconnaissance photographs showed enormous construction activity, concrete deliveries on a scale that made analysts nervous. But they did not know what was being built. Was it another V-1 launch site? A fuel depot? A submarine facility? The debate inside British intelligence went on for months. And every week that passed, the tunnels got deeper. The barrels got longer. The countdown to completion crept forward. Winston Churchill was briefed in early 1944. The reports were fragmentary, contradictory, frustrating. His scientific advisor, Lord Charles, insisted it was probably nothing extraordinary. But Duncan Sandys, Churchill's son-in-law who headed the investigation into German secret weapons, was not so calm. He had seen what the V-1 and V-2 were capable of. He believed there was a third weapon, something they hadn't identified yet. He was right. The RAF launched bombing raids against Mimoyecques in early 1944. Hundreds of tons of conventional bombs fell on the site, and almost nothing happened because the entire weapon system was buried under meters of solid chalk and reinforced concrete. Bombs cratered the surface. They destroyed supply depots. They killed workers, but they did not touch the barrels. They did not reach the firing chambers. Kammler's design was holding. The construction continued. By the spring of 1944, the Germans estimated they were 8 to 12 weeks from operational readiness. Let that date settle in your mind. 8 to 12 weeks from the spring of 1944. That puts full operational capability somewhere between late May and late June. D-Day was June 6, 1944. If the V-3 had fired on London during the critical days of the Normandy invasion, the psychological impact alone could have been catastrophic. 250 shells per hour. Silent. Unstoppable. Falling on a city whose people were already exhausted after 5 years of war. The political pressure on Churchill to divert resources, to pull back, to negotiate, would have been immense. The carefully coordinated Allied logistics chain, already stretched to breaking point, would have fractured under the weight of civilian panic. Hitler believed this completely. He told his generals that the V-3 would break British morale at the exact moment the Allies needed it most. He may not have been wrong, but then came a decision that changed the course of history, made by a man most people have never heard of. Barnes Wallis had already proven himself a genius. He was the engineer who designed the bouncing bomb used in the famous Dambusters raid of 1943. He had a gift for solving problems that other people considered insoluble. And now, sitting in his office at Vickers with a new set of reconnaissance photographs, he turned his attention to Mimoyecques. He understood something the RAF planners had missed. Conventional bombs were not working because they were detonating on impact with the surface. They needed a bomb that didn't detonate on impact. A bomb that buried itself deep into the ground before exploding. A bomb that sent its shockwave upward, through the chalk, into the tunnels themselves. You call it Tallboy. Tallboy was a 12,000-pound penetrating bomb, 12 feet long, engineered with extraordinary precision. Its casing was thick enough to survive initial impact with the ground. Its fins were designed to spin it as it fell, giving it gyroscopic stability and a near supersonic terminal velocity. It would bury itself up to 30 meters into the earth before detonating. And the explosion would create not just a crater, but an earthquake. A subterranean shockwave that could collapse tunnels, crack foundations, destroy anything buried below. On July 6, 1944, exactly 1 month after D-Day, 617 Squadron, the same Dambusters unit that had proven what precision bombing could achieve, attacked Mimoyecques with Tallboys. The bombs fell through the chalk. They found the tunnels. The shockwaves tore through the reinforced shafts like water through paper. Several barrels were destroyed. The structural integrity of the entire facility was compromised. German engineers surveyed the damage and delivered their verdict. The site was no longer viable for the original 25-barrel design. They scaled back. Attempted repairs. Launched limited tests with 2 operational barrels at a different site. And the results confirmed their worst nightmare. The weapon worked. The shells reached their targets. But it was too late. The invasion had succeeded. The momentum had shifted. Within weeks, Allied ground forces were sweeping toward the Pas-de-Calais. On September 6, 1944, Canadian troops overran Mimoyecques. They found the tunnels. They descended into the earth. And they stood in silence inside a weapon that had almost changed everything. Some of those soldiers took photographs. Others wrote letters home. One Canadian sergeant reportedly stood at the base of one of the enormous angled shafts, looked up at the sky visible at the top, and simply said, "I had no idea." None of them did. Most of the world still doesn't. The V-3 site at Mimoyecques is open to visitors today. You can walk those tunnels. You can run your hand along the chalk walls that slave laborers carved by hand in the freezing winter of 1943. You can stand at the base of the barrel shafts and look up at the same sky that German engineers once calculated as the trajectory to London. It is one of the most haunting places in Europe, a monument not to what happened, but to what almost did. The historical footnotes are brutal in their simplicity. The entire V-3 program cost Germany the equivalent of hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks, tens of thousands of slave labor hours, the lives of an uncounted number of workers who died in the tunnels, and the bombing raids from disease and exhaustion. And it produced nothing. Not one shell fired in anger from Mimoyecques. Not one civilian casualty in London from this specific weapon. By every measurable military standard, it was a catastrophic failure. But here is the thought that keeps historians awake at night. Barnes Wallis almost didn't develop Tallboy in time. The RAF almost kept using conventional bombs. Allied intelligence almost dismissed Mimoyecques as a minor construction site. The margin between failure and completion was measured not in months, but in weeks, perhaps days. The weapon that nearly won the war for Nazi Germany wasn't stopped by genius alone. It was stopped by a razor-thin sequence of correct decisions made under enormous pressure by exhausted people working in the dark. And that is the most terrifying truth of all. History doesn't hinge on grand certainties. It hinges on moments, small windows, single choices, the right bomb, delivered by the right squadron 3 weeks before the wrong answer arrived instead. The tunnels at Mimoyecques are still there. Cold, quiet, patient. And if you listen carefully enough in the silence beneath all that French chalk, you can almost hear the echo of what the world might have become.